smoke tasted like grief. Lena stood barefoot in the charred ruins of what used to be her home. Her lungs burned with every breath, but she didn't cough. She couldn't. The sound of it might have drowned out something, anything left behind. No cries. No footsteps. Just wind and ash. The cabin was still glowing in places, like the fire hadn't quite made peace with its own rage. One wall had collapsed inward. The Eli's cradle lay in splinters. Half-melted wax from a candle hardened across its frame like frozen. Tears. The fields were gone. The chickens gone. Even the dog's chain had been snapped. They didn't just take her sons. They erased her. She found the blood first, on the edge of the wagon trail. A child's handprint, small, smudged, dragged. And beside it, a boot print not made by any man she knew. Her heart thundered. She took 3 steps forward before her right leg buckled. The sound it made, wet, wrong, final, tore the scream. From her throat. She dropped like a stone, face hitting gravel, vision flashing white. She bit the inside of her mouth to stay conscious. When she reached down, her fingers found the jagged edge of bone pressing against skin. Broken, she stared. Up at the burning clouds. They thought that would stop her. Before we jump back in, make sure you subscribe. Because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special just for you. Another story, another secret. And maybe a whisper you weren't meant to hear. She tore the hem of her skirt with shaking hands, wrapped it tight around the break. There was no time for clean lines or straight splints. Only pressure, only movement. Her boys were out there, somewhere between the scorched homestead and the godless vastness beyond it. She had nothing but a knife, a snapped leg, and a name burned into her mind. Colton Briggs, a man she once fed stew and coffee by her fire. He had smiled at her baby, tipped his hat to her boys. He was one of them, ex-scout, grinning drunk, half-mercenary. Hired by settlers to clean out the land. Now riding with deserters and killers, worse than wolves. He took them. She knew it, felt it in the marrow of her broken limb. No strangers would have known where she hid the cellar door, or that her husband had left to join the militia. Only Colton. Only him. The trail was wide and cruel. Boot prints, horse droppings, scratches on rocks where the wagon scraped too tight. Blood drops like breadcrumb curses. She followed on her hands and one knee, dragging her bad leg behind her like dead weight. The pain didn't fade, it multiplied, swelled, it whispered. Seductions to stop, to sleep. But every mile she crawled, she saw them in her mind. Thomas, 8, brave, always asking questions, holding a stick like a sword. Eli, 5, still slept with a toy bear sewn from old tobacco cloth. Couldn't fall. Asleep without hearing her sing. She crawled until her palms bled. Then crawled more. By nightfall, she'd made 6 miles. Only 64 to go. The desert changes at night. By day, it is heat and hunger, but by night it's teeth. The moon rose pale and sharp, casting silver across the wasteland. Shadows. Stretched long, the kind that made you believe in things you couldn't name. Lena moved slower now, half delirious, her limbs trembling with fever. The makeshift wrap around her leg was soaked through blood, pus, and heat radiating from the break like coals under skin. But she didn't stop, not when the coyotes started circling. Not when their howls bounced off the canyon walls in a chorus. Of hunger, they moved like ghosts, 4, maybe 5 always in the edge of her sight. Yellow eyes. Lean bodies, patient. She gripped her knife tight and whispered to the stars, "Come on then." But they didn't. They knew something she didn't. At mile 10, she found the first sign they were close. A campfire ring, still warm, meat bones scattered. A child's torn boot string. She collapsed beside it and ran her fingers over the soot. The tracks told a story. 3 horses, 1 wagon. 2 men watching, 1 asleep. 1 child had tried to Run small footprints broken by adult boots dragging him back. Thomas, she could almost hear his voice echoing in the canyon. "Mama? Mama, I didn't mean to." She screamed into her fists so the coyotes wouldn't hear her cry. That night, as the moon reached its highest point, Lena lay back against a rock and watched the sky spin. If she died now, they'd vanish forever. So she broke a twig, jammed it between her teeth, and rewrapped her leg by moonlight. She passed out from the pain. But in the morning, she woke up crawling. The mesquite trees stood like watchmen, bent, scarred, and silent. By mile 14, Lena had long stopped counting the ribs poking from her skin. Hunger was no longer a scream, it was a whisper now. A trickster, promising things if she just lay down for a little while. But she'd learned early, the desert didn't make promises. It only made graves. She crawled under the twisted limbs of a mesquite grove for shade. Her fingers, caked in dirt and blood, dragged over something dry and brittle. A bone, small, human. She froze. Her eyes followed the cracked earth scattered around the base of the tree were more bones. Child-sized. Weathered. Picked clean. Something had happened here. Years ago, maybe, a massacre. Or worse, a feeding. She whispered a prayer she didn't believe in anymore and kept moving. But then just beyond the bones, she saw it. A carving. On the bark of the mesquite trunk. Etched by a blade. He takes the small ones. Fresh, deep, angry. Lena stared at the words, her body trembling. Someone else had come through here. Someone who knew Colton Briggs. Someone who left behind a warning or a confession. She heard a branch snap behind her, spun, and saw nothing but a flicker of motion, something retreating fast into the brush. Not an animal, not a coyote. A man, watching. The wind shifted. And then she heard it. A child's voice, muffled, faint. "Mama." She bolted forward, broken legs screaming. Hands grabbing sand, rocks, thorns pulling her across the earth like a wounded animal. She called out, over and over. But the voice was gone. And in its place, war drums, far off, beating slow. Like a storm still waiting, they started at sundown. Low, distant, steady, like a heartbeat in the bones of the land. Lena paused mid-crawl, her raw fingers curling into the sand. Her ears tilted like a coyote's, listening, measuring. The drums weren't Apache. She'd heard Apache drums before, during the summer raids near Dry Creek. Their rhythm was ceremonial. Proud, these were different. Slower, darker. Like someone announcing death, 1 mile at a time. She crept to higher ground, an outcropping of stone jutting from the earth, like a broken tooth. From there, she could see the valley below. Shadows moved near the canyon wall. Campfires, horses, silhouettes of men. And wagons, one of them covered in tarp. One of them large enough to cage children. Her hands tightened. The pain in her leg had risen to a steady boil, but her mind had shifted away from survival, into something colder, harder. She could no longer afford to feel like a mother. She had to become a weapon. She spotted a trail steep, hidden between 2 cliff faces. Not one they'd take wagons through. Too narrow, too dangerous. But for someone with nothing left to lose, it was a shortcut. She would cut through the canyon, meet them head on. A rattlesnake slid across her path. She let it pass. By the time the moon rose, she was halfway down the hidden path, dragging her leg like a ghost. Teeth clenched, eyes locked on the valley below. The drums kept beating. She didn't know if they were for her sons, or for her. But she'd march through them either way. The canyon narrowed like a throat. Walls closed in on both sides, red rock carved by centuries of wind and blood. The trail was barely wide enough for a body, and Lena had to wedge herself between stone. Like she was being born again. Her leg dragged like dead weight behind her, snagging on roots, smearing blood into the earth. No birds, no insects. Just her breath, and the beat of those drums echoing in the far distance. And then something new. A smell, rot, sweat, smoke, and copper. She reached a shelf in the rock and pulled herself up, biting down on a scream. Her vision doubled, and for a moment the canyon wall seemed to breathe. She blinked, spat blood, and looked down. That's when she saw it. At the canyon's base lay a ring of stones blackened by fire. Around it remains, skulls cracked open like melons. Rib cages gnawed clean. Bones lashed together into shapes that resembled men, but weren't. Fetishes, trophies. This wasn't Apache. This was something older. Something tribal but broken, twisted by violence and dust and years of unchecked cruelty. She heard a scrape, turned, and there, just 10 feet above her, crouched in the shadows of the rock shelf, was a man. Skin painted black, scars down his chest. No whites in his eyes, watching. She didn't scream. She didn't beg. She stared back. He sniffed the air like an animal, then slithered into the dark. Gone. Lena knew then. Even wolves didn't come. Here, but she wasn't a wolf. She was a mother. And she was already dead to everything except getting her sons back. So she slid down the far side of the canyon into the dark mouth of something even the desert feared. The first scream came before the fire. A man's voice cut short. Lena reached the canyon's edge, crouched behind brush, her breath ragged and hot. Below, lit in the orange flicker of torches and a rising campfire, the wagons had circled up like they were preparing for siege. But this wasn't protection, it was control. 4 men, 1 boy. Her boy, Thomas, bound near the wagon's wheel, bruised and dirt-smeared, but alive. Eli was nowhere in sight. Colton Briggs stood by the fire, laughing through rotten teeth. Shirt open to the gut, a jug of whiskey in hand. His gun belt was loose, like he hadn't expected a threat since the day he left Lena to burn. She watched as he kicked a man one of his own face down into the dirt. Then something moved on the ridge. Not her, something else. A figure, barefoot, painted face, knife in hand, stepping silently down the opposite slope. Lena's breath caught. The shadow moved with purpose. Calculated, not wild like the others. And then another, 2, 3. A third force was descending on the camp. She didn't know if they were friend or nightmare, but they didn't wait. The first torch hit the wagon cover. Flames roared, screams rose. Briggs pulled his revolver too slow. One of the painted men lunged from the dark, blade flashing in the firelight, catching Briggs in the shoulder. He bellowed like a bull and staggered. Lena moved. She didn't. Remember crawling, she flew. She reached Thomas as chaos bloomed around them, cut his ropes with shaking hands, whispered his name like a prayer. He looked at her like she was a ghost. "Mama," she pulled him close. "Where's Eli?" But Thomas's answer was drowned by a second explosion, gunpowder, wagon fire catching something inside. The whole camp lit up like a funeral pyre. And behind her, Briggs screamed her name, Martha. Her name tore from Briggs' throat like a curse. Lena didn't flinch. She shoved Thomas behind the smoking wheel of a tipped wagon and stood up, knife in hand, broken leg braced against the axle. Fire roared behind her, painting the sky in warlight. The painted attackers, Apache scouts, or something more feral, had scattered the camp. 3 of Briggs' men lay dead already. A 4th was crawling, gurgling blood, but Briggs didn't run. He stormed toward her, clutching his bleeding shoulder, revolver swinging wild in his hand. "You ain't real," he spat. "I saw your bones burn." Lena stepped forward. "I walked 70 miles, she said, voice hoarse, "on a leg you helped break." She hurled the knife. It missed, but it wasn't about hitting. It was about closing the distance. Briggs roared and raised the pistol, fired once. Missed. The second shot clipped her shoulder. Flesh tore. She didn't stop. She grabbed a burning stick from the ground, swung it at his face. The flame licked his beard, and he stumbled back, howling, hand to his eyes. She tackled him with the force of every mile, every scream, every stolen night spent praying to a god that never came. They hit the dirt. She grabbed his gun, turned it in his hand, and jammed the barrel under his chin. He grinned through blood. "You ain't got the guts." She pulled the trigger. Click, empty. They wrestled, rolled, kicked up dust and fire. Then steel flashed. One of the painted warriors descended the ridge, silent as a shadow, and buried a blade deep into Briggs' spine. He jerked, twitched, died without a word. Lena stared at the man who killed him. He gave no name. He only nodded once to her, not in gratitude, but in understanding. Then he vanished back into the smoke. Lena collapsed beside the corpse of the man who took her sons. And when she looked up, Thomas was still there, alive, watching. But Ellie was still missing. And the fire was growing. The fire ate everything. Canvas curled. Gunpowder popped. Horses screamed into the smoke as they broke their tethers and vanished into the night. Lena limped through the wreckage with Thomas clinging to her side, coughing through a wet cloth torn from Briggs' shirt. "Where's Eli?" she whispered again. Thomas didn't answer. Couldn't. His eyes were wide, too wide. Somewhere behind them, part of him had broken. She knew that look. She wore it too. They searched every wagon. No crib, no blankets, no small boots. Only blood and the dead. Then she found it on the edge of camp, where the fire hadn't reached. A torn bit of fabric. Familiar. Eli's bear. Half burned, half sodden. Lena dropped to her knees and held it to her chest like it could still feel him. And just then a sound. Not the drums. Not horses, water. Fast moving, just over the next rise. She climbed the slope, dragging Thomas behind her, her body threatening collapse. And there it was, a river, carving through the canyon like a wound, dark, deep, cold even in the desert heat. A trail led to it, wagon tracks, boots, drag marks, and blood, but no body. Then footprints, smaller, unsteady, running. Lena's heart seized. He got away, she breathed. She turned to Thomas. Eli ran. Thomas looked at the river and nodded, slowly, like he was waking from a dream. "But Mama," he whispered. He was scared. He went into the water. Panic surged. The river was fast. Too fast for a 5-year-old. She dropped to the bank, scanning, crawling, calling his name into the roar of the current. And then a flash of pale fabric caught on a branch downstream. Lena's breath hitched. She stood, limped into the current. It pulled hard. Her leg screamed, but she didn't stop. She followed the river, staggering through the dark, shouting Eli's name again and again until her voice bled. And in the moonlight, she saw it. A small figure face down, caught in a crook of roots. She screamed his name one last time, and the boy moved. He was alive. Barely. Lena waded into the current like it was fire, arms outstretched, blood smearing the water. Her broken leg buckled as she reached the roots, but she didn't feel it anymore. All she saw was Eli's tiny body shivering, lips blue, his little fists clutched tight around something. She pulled him free. His eyes fluttered open. "Mama." The river had taken everything but his voice. She pressed him to her chest, kissed his wet hair, and sobbed so hard her ribs ached. For the first time in 9 days, she allowed herself to cry like someone who might survive. But the relief was brief. The cold had gotten deep into Eli. His breath came shallow too fast. She carried him out of the water, up onto the bank, wrapped him in her own soaked shirt. He was burning now, freezing and burning. Fever rising like fire under his skin. She had no medicine, no firewood, no shelter, only Thomas, and the painted shadows that still lingered in the rocks above. And yet something strange happened. Just as Lena prepared to dig a pit for warmth, A figure stepped from the trees, one of the ones from the attack. A woman. Apache. Hair braided tight with bone charms, face like carved stone. In her hands a pouch of herbs, a flask of water, and a skin blanket. She did not speak. She knelt beside Lena, pressed a hand to Eli's forehead, then to Lena's. She nodded once, then began to work. Lena didn't ask why. Didn't ask if it was pity, magic, or some ancient law of mothers helping mothers. She only helped hold. Eli still as the woman smeared paste across his chest and made him drink something bitter. The wind howled. The river kept moving, and when the dawn came, Eli was still breathing. The woman's name was not given, but her presence was enough. She stayed through the night, tending Eli with slow, practiced hands feeding him sips from a leather flask, whispering words in a tongue older than English. Lena didn't understand the language, but she understood the tone. Patience, grief, strength. By sunrise, Eli's fever had broken. His breathing deepened. His hands unclenched. And for the first time in what felt like a lifetime, Lena let herself lie back against a rock, eyes half closed, blood crusting on her temple, and just breathe. That's when the others came. 3 more Apache, silent, steady. One of them was the man from the ridge, the one who'd watched her in the canyon, the one who killed Briggs with a single thrust. He stood across from her now, arms crossed, face unreadable. She didn't flinch. "I don't owe you thanks," she said hoarsely. "But I'm not your enemy." He tilted his head, said nothing. Then the woman beside him stepped forward and drew a mark in the dust, a curved symbol Lena didn't recognize. She placed her hand beside it, then reached out and touched Lena's arm. The message was clear. "You bled for your sons. We saw." She remembered the way they'd watched her crawl, the way they appeared at the edge of fire and shadow. They hadn't helped before, not because they didn't care, but because they were waiting, measuring her, testing her. One of the men handed her a carved walking staff wrapped in rawhide. Not a gift, not an apology, a recognition. She took it with shaking hands. The woman touched Eli's cheek one more time, then turned and vanished into the trees, the others following without. A sound, no words, just silence, and something far deeper than language. The mountain didn't speak, but it remembered. Every rock Lena stepped over, every cliff she leaned against, every trail she carved through with her ruined leg, it watched. It had watched all of them, the war parties, the deserters, the settlers. And now her. She was no longer crawling. The walking staff from the Apache steadied her. Her boys walked beside her, Thomas holding tight to her skirt, Eli carried on her back, still weak but breathing steady. They were not safe, but they were whole. And they were moving north. The map wasn't drawn on paper. It was in Lena's mind now, etched by instinct and vengeance, lit by the glow of firelight memories, and marked by graves. Each valley she crossed whispered of those who had come before. Burned out camps, piles of bones, a child's toy hanging from a twisted tree. She knew she wasn't alone. The Apache woman had left signs, knotted grass, rock stacks, and once a strip of red cloth tied to a cactus. Signals, guidance, an invisible hand steering her away from traps, away from militias, away from war bands that would not see her. As a mother, only as prey. But even the land had its trials. By the 3rd day, a storm rolled over the peaks, black clouds bleeding across the sun, bringing with them a wind that howled like the ghosts of the desert. Lightning cracked, rain fell like knives. And Lena, leg trembling, teeth chattering, pulled her boys into a cave just as the heavens broke open. Inside the cave, carved into the wall, was another mark. The same curved symbol the Apache woman had drawn in the dirt. Only this time, beneath it, scratched deep in stone, was a name. She who does not fall. Lena traced the words with her fingers, and for the first time, She understood. The mountain had remembered her. The rain didn't wash her scent from the land, it only made it louder. When the storm broke, the desert didn't bloom, it awakened. Coyotes yipped in the distance. A hawk circled above. And far below the ridge, where Lena once stood to scream into silence, the sound returned. Drums, slow, measured, then faster. War drums. She recognized them, not the deep, mournful rhythm of Apache warning, but something uglier, harsher, the kind white men beat when they marched under stolen flags. Raiders, renegades, the ones who'd taken her sons and burned her world. They were still hunting, still nearby, still smelling blood in the dirt. Lena didn't wait to learn how many. She strapped Ely tighter to her back, lifted the walking stick, and whispered to Thomas, "Quiet now, baby." Just like the lizards. Low and quiet. Together they slid from the cave mouth and disappeared into the brush, hugging the slope. The rain had slicked the earth, and every step tested her fractured leg. She winced, but didn't fall. The staff groaned beneath her weight. Hours passed. The drums faded, then rose again. Closer this time. That's when she saw them. 6 men, 3 on foot, 3 on horseback, ragged, armed. One of them carried a charred piece of cloth, her blanket. Another wore a necklace of spent bullets and children's teeth. They weren't tracking her. They were taunting her, as if to say, "You left something behind." She felt the fury claw up her throat like fire. Lena pressed Thomas to the dirt, kissed his hair once, and whispered, "Don't move, no matter what." Then she reached for the staff, but not to lean on it. The Apache had carved something into the base. A hidden blade, rusty, but sharp enough. She pulled it free, no longer prey, no longer running. The war drums might be back, but now she would answer. They laughed when they saw her limping toward them. One raised a rifle lazily. Another spit in the dirt and said something in Spanish, something cruel. But none of them moved fast enough. She didn't give a war cry. She gave them silence. The blade flashed first through the nearest man's throat. His laughter ended in a wet gasp. Before his body hit the ground, Lena had driven the staff deep into the gut of the one beside him, twisted, and let him fall like the dirt he came from. The horses reared. A gun fired wild. She didn't stop. Blood poured from her nose. Her legs shook with every step. But the fire inside her was older than pain now, older than her name, older than the flags they rode under. She remembered Thomas. She remembered Ely. She remembered the smell of her burned home. And the mother she used to be. She buried that woman here. The man with the necklace of teeth lunged with a hatchet. She caught his wrist. The blade sang. His scream was short. When it ended, she stood over 3 bodies. The others had fled. Into the hills, like jackals scattering from a lion. She didn't follow. She didn't need to. They'd carry her story further than her feet ever could. She buried the 3 in a standing circle back to back, weapons broken at their sides, not for honor, for warning. She tied their horses to a thorn tree, took what food she could. And when she turned to gather her sons again, Thomas stared. Wide-eyed from behind the rocks, not afraid. In awe, he said nothing until they were walking again. Then, quietly, "Are we safe now, Mama?" She didn't answer right away. Then, "No, baby." But they're not either. And the mountain carried her words for miles. No road led there. No compass needle twitched. It wasn't a place on any map, or any soldier's report, or even a whisper on passing wagons. But it existed, beyond 3 broken ridgelines, past the bones of a dry riverbed, beneath a canopy of juniper and cloud. That's where Lena found them, the Apache. Not a war party this time, not drums or knives or tests, just silence, and eyes that had seen too much and knew more. A girl no older. Then Thomas reached for her hand. An elder placed a palm against Lena's chest, not to stop her, but to feel her heartbeat. Still strong, still human. Still alive. They spoke no English. She spoke no Apache. But pain didn't need a translator. And survival was its own kind of language. They let her in. Treated her wounds with crushed bark and warm poultices. Fed Thomas berries and rabbit stew until he slept smiling for the first time in weeks. She never asked to stay. They never asked her to leave. Over time she learned their stories. And they hers. The women called her sister who bled across the valley. The children called her Firefoot because she limped but never fell. And the warriors? They watched her train with the younger men. Saw her wield a blade not as a weapon, but as a memory. A promise. They offered her beads not as tribute but respect. Because they'd heard what she did. To the men who took her. Sons, to the ones buried standing. And they knew. She wasn't a settler anymore. She was one of them now. One night, under a sky so full of stars, it looked like the earth had cracked open above. Lena whispered to her boys, "This is home now. The world forgot us, but we remember each other." And somewhere, in the places too wild to tame and too sacred to name, her story became not just one of pain, but of endurance. Of a mother who walked 70 miles with a broken leg and kept going. Drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from. I'd love to see how far this story travels.